Have you ever stood amidst the ruins of a great civilization and felt a strange, eerie stillness? In places like the Parthenon in Athens or the sanctuary of Delphi, the stones seem to rumble. They speak of a time when the air was thick with divine presence, and every sunrise was a gift from Helios, every lightning strike a tantrum from Zeus, and every twist of fate a thread spun by the Moirai. We know these stories by heart, the epic dramas of Olympus, the heroic quests, the tragic flaws of gods who behaved all too human. But then the rumble stopped. The grand temples, once vibrant with sacrifice and song, fall into a profound quiet. The oracles cease to speak. The festivals made from memory. This leaves us with one of history's most haunting questions. What happened to the Greek gods and goddesses? If their power was so absolute, their worship so deeply woven into the fabric of ancient life, how could they simply vanish? Our imaginations, fueled by myth itself, might conjure a cataclysm worthy of their legends, a final, apocalyptic war between titans, gods, and mortals, a Ragnarok of the Mediterranean that shattered the world and buried the deities in the rubble of their own creation. The truth, however, is far more subtle, more complex, and in many ways, more tragic. There was no single glorious battle. Instead, the gods of Greece were defeated not by a superior army, but by an idea. Their end was a slow, meticulous, and relentless fading, orchestrated by the most powerful force in human history, a revolution of faith. To understand their disappearance, we must first truly internalize what they represented. For us today, Greek mythology is a collection of fantastic stories, blockbuster movies, rippling novels, and academic subjects. But for the ancient Greeks, this was not mythology. This was religion. It was their absolute truth. It was the framework that explained the chaos of the world, provided meaning in the face of tragedy, and dictated the social and moral order. Prayers were offered to Artemis for a safe hunt, to Poseidon for calm seas, to Demeter for a bountiful harvest. The gods were inextricably linked to identity, to community, and to survival itself. Their presence was as real and tangible as the marble of their statues. The fall of the Olympians follows a pattern we see across the ancient world, a pattern repeated with the Norse gods, the Celtic Druids, and the Egyptian pantheon. A new, monolithic faith, Christianity, didn't just arrive with alternative teachings. It arrived with a mandate for total spiritual conquest. It bulldozed its way across the spiritual landscape, not with swords alone, but with a devastatingly effective two-pronged attack, intellectual critique, and outright demonization. This was a war of perception, and the old gods were systematically recast, not as false idols, but as very real, very dangerous agents of evil. But the ground for this invasion was already fertile. The cracks in the foundation of Mount Olympus had been spreading for centuries before the first Christian missionaries set foot in Greece. The philosophers, the very intellectuals that Greek culture celebrated, were often the most vocal critics of their own gods. Thinkers like Xenophanes of Colon, as far back as the 6th century BCE, openly mocked the anthropomorphic nature of the deities. He argued that it was absurd that gods would be depicted with human form, and more importantly, with human vices. If horses could draw, he famously quipped, they would draw their gods like horses. This was a profound criticism. Why worship beings who were petulant, jealous, adulterous, and vengeful? This line of thinking was expanded by giants like Plato. While he didn't dismiss the divine outright, he pointed toward a higher, more perfect form of reality. His concept of the form of the good, a singular, ultimate, and perfect source of all truth and reality, was a philosophical stepping stone toward monotheism. It implicitly suggested that the chaotic, flawed pantheon of Olympus was a primitive shadow of a much greater, singular perfection. So, by the time a man like St. Paul began preaching in places like Athens around 49 69 AD, he wasn't introducing a completely alien concept of a supreme god to a polytheistic people. He was, in a way, building upon a philosophical critique that was already centuries old. He found an audience already grappling with a quiet crisis of faith. The Christian argument against the pagan gods was masterfully crafted and ruthlessly efficient. Early church fathers, most notably Saint Augustine, wielded the very stories of the gods as their primary weapon. They didn't say the gods were fake, they said they were demons. In their apologetics, they pointed to the myths and asked a simple, damning question. If these are beings worthy of your worship, why do they embody the very sins we teach you to avoid? Why would you pray to a king of gods, Zeus, who is a serial adulterer? Why would you honor Ares, the embodiment of mindless slaughter? This rhetoric was incredibly powerful. It framed Christianity not just as a different path, but as a morally superior one. It offered a God who was omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, a perfect, fatherly figure of pure love and justice. In contrast, the Olympians were portrayed as a corrupt, supernatural aristocracy, a dysfunctional family ruling over humanity with whim and cruelty. For many, especially the poor and the disenfranchised, the Christian message of universal love, an afterlife of reward for the righteous, and a personal relationship with a single caring God was an infinitely more attractive proposition than appeasing a multitude of unpredictable narcissistic deities. This ideological warfare was coupled with a very real physical one, as the Roman Empire, which had adopted and syncretized the Greek gods into its own pantheon, Zeus became Jupiter, Aphrodite became Venus, began to officially Christianize under emperors like Constantine and Theodosius. The pressure to convert intensified dramatically. The tolerance that had characterized Roman religious policy evaporated. Laws were passed forbidding pagan sacrifices and rituals. Temples were systematically closed, dismantled, or converted into churches. The Great Library of Alexandria, a repository of ancient pagan knowledge, was sacked, its scroll burned, a symbol of the New World Order. For those who refused to convert, the consequences grew severe. They faced social ostracization, heavy taxes, and, in many cases, violence and execution. It was no longer a matter of philosophical debate. It was a matter of life and death. When presented with the choice between clinging to the fading memory of Poseidon or embracing the living God of the rapidly expanding church, complete with imperial backing, the choice for most was pragmatic. The old gods never truly died in a literal sense. People didn't wake up one day and stop believing in Apollo. Instead, they slowly, generation by generation, simply stopped talking about them. They were raised as Greek Orthodox Christians, and the stories of the old pantheon were relegated to the status of what they are for us today. Myths, folklore, sinful superstitions to be forgotten. They faded into the quietest of obscurities, their names scratched off temples and written in forbidden texts. Yet, a spark remained. The gods, it seems, are notoriously difficult to kill completely. In recent decades, we've witnessed a remarkable resurrection of interest in Greek pantheon. This is largely because we've become a more secular global society. We can now engage with these stories academically, artistically, and spiritually without fear of persecution. We are free to dissect them and admire them without the threat of the stake. Popular culture has been the modern-day herald for this return. Blockbuster films like Percy Jackson, Troy, and Wonder Woman have reintroduced Zeus, Athena, and Ares to a new generation. Video games and graphic novels reimagine their epic tales. This exposure has done more than just entertain. It's sparked a genuine spiritual movement. Hellenism, or Hellenic polytheism, is now an officially recognized religion in Greece and is growing around the world. Modern worshippers are reconstructing the rituals, celebrating the festivals, and praying to the gods of Olympus once again, separating the deep theological beliefs from the literary metaphors of the myths. It's a profound irony that the very immortality Christianity used to condemn the gods is now a reason for their renewed appeal. In a modern world often disillusioned with rigid dogma and the concept of perfect, infallible institutions, the Greek gods offer a different paradigm. They are flawed, complex, and relatable. Their stories don't demand perfect faith, but rather explore the complexities of power, nature, and humanity itself. They represent a world where the divine is not separate from nature, but is inherent within it. So, to answer the question we began with, where did the Greek gods go? They did not fall in a blaze of glory. They underwent a centuries-long campaign of ideological shift and political pressure, a silent war where the weapons were words, laws, and the promise of a new world. They were scoured from the public square and buried under the weight of a new empire's faith. Christianity was the undeniable, final nail in the coffin of mainstream Olympian worship. But their story didn't end there. They were sleeping, waiting in the pages of forgotten texts and the silent stones of their temples. And now, in an age of information and spiritual seeking, they are awakening. They are being rediscovered, not as devils or merely fairy tales, but as powerful, archetypal forces and as objects of genuine devotion. Their second act is being written now, not by ancient poets, but by us. Whether we see them as psychological archetypes, cultural treasures, or literal divine beings, the gods of Olympus have against all odds once again found their way home. Their long slumber has ended, and their voices are now merging into a chorus. Learn more about Greek mythology in the next videos, and let us know in the comments below. Which myth would you like to hear next?